There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch by Kohberger.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, 27-year veteran of the NYPD. Folks, first and foremost, I want to wish everyone a happy Memorial Day weekend, and let's not forget what Memorial Day is about members of our armed forces who have made the supreme sacrifice, and not just the ones who've made a supreme sacrifice, just the ones who have served this country honorably and have made this country what it is today and allowed us to be free in this country. So, folks, so much happened in the last week in regards to, of course, the Idaho case and Bryan Kohberger. Recapping, we know that he was indicted by a grand jury. And what that meant in the bigger picture was, of course, that now the hearing that was supposed to occur, the probable cause hearing on June 26th, all of that now is null and void. The grand jury indictment, the true bill issued by the grand jury, supersedes that and sort of overpowers that, and now there is no need for a probable cause hearing. However, what does that do from a legal perspective? And many people that aren't familiar with the criminal justice system saw this as an unfair advantage that the prosecution used against the defense in regards to the prosecution of Bryan Kohberger. However, the defense uses many strategies to create doubt because that is their job. A defense in our system, in an adversarial system where the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant charged, in fact, is guilty of the crime charged. And the defense's job, as we all know, is to create doubt. And they'll do that in any number of ways. And one of the big things we heard also this week was when on Monday, when Bryan Kohberger was arraigned, instead of pleading guilty through his attorney, he chose to stand and remain silent. And in our procedure, the trial judge, his name is Judge, how apropos for a judge to be named Judge, he entered the plea for Bryan Kohberger, so the not guilty plea, because he chose to stand alone. Many people took that to mean a number of different things, but some took it as meaning like an arrogant thing, that he was arrogant and not saying not guilty. We all remember, and everyone compares all these major cases, of course, to the O.J. Simpson case. When he was arraigned, they asked him to plead, and he said 100% not guilty. So people maybe were expecting some dramatic type of call like that from Bryan Kohberger. However, that wasn't going to happen. He chose to stand silent. Whether his attorneys advised him to do that, or whether he took that upon himself to stand there and remain silent, that is anybody's guess right now. But a lot of the things that we've seen in this case is every single aspect of this case is being analyzed by experts and not so much experts, talking heads, as I call them, out there all over the place, people talking about his body language, people talking about legal strategy. You know, when something's overanalyzed, sometimes the analyzers get it wrong because there's too much analyzing. I'll put it that way, because no one can predict what is going to happen, just as no one can predict right now the amount of evidence and the importance of the evidence that the prosecution has. We spoke very in depth in regards to discovery. And it turns out in the state of Idaho, of course, discovery, all the evidence that the prosecution has must be turned over to the defense. However, and if you read the statute, if you read the law, it doesn't say when. So the when part is just, it says before the start of the trial. I remember when I was a cop, a young cop, and even a sergeant, and I'd go on trial with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. And the day the trial started, they would hand the defense 2 milk crates full of discovery material. And you could see the look of anguish on the defense attorney, like, are you kidding me? Like, I can't be ready. And then, of course, the defense attorney would say to the judge, Your Honor, as you could see, I just received this discovery material right now. Your Honor, I'm requesting a 2-month stay in order to review all of this material. And usually the judge would give the defense that amount of time to review. But it was a strategic move by some of the best assistant district attorneys for the Manhattan DA's office. So when you think of discovery, folks that are not used to watching the criminal justice system, yes, all the evidence that the prosecution has, they must turn over to the defense. However, time is not mentioned there. When is not as clear as the how and the if, and it has to be turned over, and the where. But the when is a little bit unclear these days. So it's not clear. One of the things, of course, that the defense is demanding is the grand jury minutes. And because during the grand jury, during the indictment, there was undoubtedly some evidence presented that the defense doesn't know about right now. So let me play a little bit of this video of Law and Crime, and we're going to see Bryan Kohberger's defense attorney.
Prosecution hand over additional evidence they say may be exculpatory. All this after the accused killer enters a silent not guilty plea in the University of Idaho quadruple murders. Thanks for joining us today for Law and Crime Network. I'm Sierra Gillespie. Now, on Monday of this week, a Latah County, Idaho judge entered a not guilty plea on Kohberger's behalf after he and attorney Ann Taylor remained silent. This hearing coming just 1 week after a grand jury indicted Kohberger on 4 counts of first-degree murder, thus avoiding the lengthy preliminary hearing originally scheduled for next month. On November 13th of last year, 4 University of Idaho students were found stabbed to death in their off-campus home. Weeks later, Kohberger was arrested at his parents' home in Pennsylvania and was extradited back to Idaho. At the time of the murders, thousands of pieces of evidence they requested from the prosecution. So that included 10,000 pages of reports and other written material, 51 terabytes of audio and video. So Julie, what more could they even be asking for?
So this is the early stages of discovery. And keep in mind that we're dealing with a lot of forensic evidence. Forensic evidence would include potentially DNA evidence, notes from any of the individuals that evaluated any of the evidence, expert witness information. There could be cellular data that is quite voluminous. There could be still interviews of witnesses that are outstanding. Officer reports. Remember, this was a pretty broad investigation, and as a defense attorney, you're going to want every single thing that is in the prosecution's possession for you to determine, not for them to determine. But
you know, folks, when I was a young cop, this is no joke. All of the officers' reports, anything an officer wrote in regards to these cases is fair game for discovery material. If you wrote some notes on a McDonald's wrapper, guess what? They want that wrapper, and they want every single note, because anything you wrote, anything you write down, and no matter what it's written upon, is fair game. And the defense will want that, again, to create doubt.
For you as the defense to determine whether or not anything they have is potentially exculpatory for your client.
So I do want to point out, though, that Kohberger's defense is asking for grand jury material under this protective order. So usually grand jury proceedings are remaining under seal. Is this different because it's his defense attorneys requesting it?
So the initial grand jury presentation is in fact secretive, but that doesn't mean that the testimony that comes out in the grand jury proceeding remains secretive. The defense has a right to review any and all witness statements and potential exhibits that came out in the grand jury. Potentially, first of all, keep in mind that there might be inconsistent statements from what they said there versus what they said in the past. And by the way, what they may say in the future at trial. The one thing usually a judge will hold back is the actual charges on the law, because that's for the judge's purview, not for the defense. But it is certainly not unusual, and it's quite appropriate for the defense to demand and get the grand jury testimony of each and every witness.
Is that something that would be public to all of us, or just simply to the attorneys who are involved in the case until trial?
So my guess is, especially considering what we've already seen in terms of the gag order in this case, that we will not be hearing or seeing any of the evidence that came out in the grand jury until at least trial. Could that change? Yes. But my expectation is that we won't know what was said other than the broad conversations we've been having in terms of what we believe the evidence is going to show.
Now, according to the defense's motion, an expert witness, investigator, and potentially even a consultant of Kohberger's defense team would want to access this information they're requesting, along, of course, with those attorneys. So does that give us any sort of clue of what the information they're hoping to have received?
Sure. Anytime you evaluate grand jury testimony, or by the way, any evidence that you're getting from the prosecution, and specifically in a case like this, when you're dealing with DNA, potentially cell phone records and computer records, you're going to want to have your own experts evaluating that very same evidence to see if they're going to come to a different conclusion.
Excuse me, folks. I just realized my mic wasn't on. I'm going to explain to you what probable cause is, which is the lowest standard of that the criminal justice system can have. But based on probable cause, of course, this is why Bryan Kohberger was arrested. And the definition of probable cause are facts and circumstances that would allow a reasonable person to believe that a crime has been committed and the person being arrested committed that crime. All right, that's like word for word. That doesn't mean he's guilty. He's innocent until proven guilty. That means that's enough to make an arrest. In the law of arrest, that's probable cause. So based on certain factors, and what established the probable cause in the very beginnings of this case, and in the very beginnings, it was a ladder. You talk about a ladder of suspicion, and the ladder of suspicion, the first thing they really had, besides, of course, the crime scene, which we don't know even to this day whether or not the crime scene pointed in the direction of Bryan Kohberger. In essence, is his blood in that crime scene? Is his blood commingled with the blood of the victims? We don't know that to this day. So let's think of what the actual probable cause was very early on in this case. And what it was the white Hyundai Elantra. You remember very early on in this case, the police said, we're looking for a white 2011 to 2016 white Hyundai Elantra. And we didn't know, and they didn't release this at the point, but that vehicle was caught on video pulling up into the house, 1122 King Road, into the backyard, making and parking in the back of that house. So that was what first established the probable cause. And then when the security officer at Washington State University found the car and saw that it was registered to one Bryan Kohberger, they started connecting the dots together, right? And then, of course, we have the sheath, the K-bar sheath, where initially was matched to Bryan Kohberger's father's DNA, which was like a 99.9% chance that the killer or the person being charged was related. His DNA was related to his father's. And then, of course, they would have matched his DNA to that knife sheath. So those were the things that gave the police probable cause, where they followed him across the country to Pennsylvania. Then we watched those two car stops, of course, by the Indiana State Police. And not that those car stops gave probable cause, but if you recall, I'm showing you the picture on the screen. There seems to be a little bit of, I would say, a little bit of nervousness on the part of Bryan Kohberger and his father in this car stop. Why was he pulled over? We don't, allegedly for following too closely to another vehicle. But we don't know if, in fact, that was true, or if the Indiana State Police was told or asked to stop his vehicle by the FBI, by the Idaho State Police. I would believe that more than that it was just a random car stop, because that really, to me, wouldn't make sense that it was just a random car stop and they didn't know who he was, and the FBI is following him across the nation, and they just allow a random law enforcement agency to pull him over. I find that hard to believe. Many things could go wrong, and I think that they would want it to be a set up car stop, that they wanted to be in control of it, to advise the state trooper, this is who you're pulling over, this is what we think he did. We just want you to ask him a couple of questions, see what's inside the car, watch his demeanor. And of course, the whole thing was on body-worn video. So when we talk about body-worn video, really pretty damn good piece of evidence, right? Let me go back a little bit to the law and crime person analyzing the grand jury minutes.
Than the experts that the prosecution has. So it's not just the defense that wants to evaluate and review this testimony or whatever exhibits that exist. They want their experts to be able to do the same, so they can have their best understanding of what the evidence is and make their own determination of what it means.
So after the defense made their motion here, the prosecution has already asked for clarification about what the defense could potentially mean about this exculpatory information. So Julie, what could the defense mean?
So we don't know. And the reason, obviously, anytime you're a defense attorney, you are looking for things to help your case. Now, something that the prosecution may not view as exculpatory or helpful to the defense can be viewed very differently by the defense. And that's why, there's often a disagreement as to whether or not something is exculpatory or not. And so the defense may not have any specific knowledge of exculpatory material. They may, in a sense, be doing what we call a fishing expedition. But if I'm the defense, I'm going to be doing that fishing expedition because I'm going to want to make sure I have anything that leads in a different direction than my client.
Yeah, it makes sense that they would want as much information as they have so the defense could decide we want to use this, we don't want to use this, etc. But this request from the defense comes as they were likely ramping up for that lengthy preliminary hearing that was set for next month, but now that's no longer going to happen. Is that itself a huge blow for the defense?
Anytime you have a preliminary hearing instead of a grand jury presentation, the one thing that the defense has an opportunity to do is hear the evidence and cross-examine the witnesses. It is a huge blow for the defense that they don't have the opportunity to have a preliminary hearing. And why is that? One, in a preliminary hearing, they get to hear the witnesses live instead of just seeing a transcript from the grand jury. Two, they get to cross-examine the witnesses, which can potentially lead to inconsistent statements for trial and give them a good exposure as to what they can expect at the trial. So I think it was disappointing for the defense when they learned that a grand jury was indicted instead of going through a preliminary hearing.
We do now know, though, that there is an October 2nd trial date set. Is that enough time for the prosecution and defense to prepare for this?
You know, folks, that October 2nd date set for a trial date, I think that was just procedural. There's no way on this earth that this case will be ready to go on October 2nd. I think, if anything, because also that this is a potential death penalty case, that you're not going to see this case go probably till 2024. So we're talking January, February. And so the October 22nd date, I don't see it. I don't see it at all. And think of all the evidence right now that the defense has yet to be presented. And we're going to talk about discovery. For example, all the digital evidence, the cell phones, right? The pinging of cell sites, the computer evidence, the social media evidence, right? Look, we all know that Bryan Kohberger had reconned 1122 King Road 12 times prior to November 13th, which was the day the quadruple murders occurred at 04:10 in the morning, at 4:10 a.m. in the morning. And prior to that, he reconned it. The other thing is, we know from digital evidence is that he turned his cell phone off. He turned his cell phone off. And if I had Mike Geary on, he would say, well, that's something called consciousness of guilt. He turned off his cell phone because he knows that the police will be and would be tracking his cell phone. So incredible, all these things. And I played this 3D examination. It's sort of a timeline for you guys. And to me, it's one of the best things that I've seen done on this case. I'm just going to play it again and thank the young lady that made it. Let me play it a little bit here.
Mates Bethany and Dylan were sleeping on the first floor. Since then, we've learned Dylan was sleeping here on the second floor, along with Xana and Ethan located here. Kaylee and Madison were located here on the third floor. The dog was located on the third floor and the room by itself. Let's move around and see through the walls into the kitchen, to the back slider, and take a look at the time frames. At 4:04 a.m., the suspect can be seen trying to park his car. At 4:09, approximately 5 minutes later, he enters the house through the back slider. At 4:18, he leaves the house after committing the crimes. At 4 4:20, he's caught on camera driving away at a high rate of speed. All of this only took 9 minutes. Let's watch what that looks like. The suspect enters through the back sliding door. He pauses at the stairs to look around to make sure no one's up. He then turns and goes upstairs. The first bedroom he stops at and opens the door, he sees no one there. He continues to the next bedroom. Here we know what happens. Downstairs, Dylan is sleeping. The noise from upstairs wakes her up. She thinks it's Kaylee playing with her dog. She gets up and goes to the door and looks out. She sees nothing there. The suspect then continues down the stairs about 3 minutes later. He then heads to Xana's room. Outside, there's a security camera picking up some whimpering, cries, and a thud at 4:17.
Folks, again, that video camera as well as the audio camera that she just stated picks up cries and whimpering. Powerful evidence, right? But again, if you're a defense attorney, you're going to try to create doubt and say, well, how do we know what that was? How do we know that was coming from that house and not somewhere else? So again, strong evidence, but not, slam dunk evidence, as we would say.
We've learned that Xana was found on the floor, which might explain the thud. Dylan again hears something and looks outside her door. She sees the suspect. He walks right past her and leaves.
Pretty amazing display. Wonderful 3D recreation of what occurred, of what we think occurred. So if this young lady that made this, and I don't have a name available to you right now, but if she can do this amazing job and not be a law enforcement expert, can you imagine the presentation that paid law enforcement 3D recreators, or when they use the actual video that recorded his car, the car that they have on video? And if they can do a recreation from that, won't that be incredible? Jane C., thank you for the 199 super sticker. Wow, in 9 minutes, you must have left DNA in that hurry. Guys, as we have said so many times, and the great Barbara Butcher, who I praise all the time, and I know a lot of you guys know her from Duty Ron's show, the former chief of staff of the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, one of the top medical legal investigators in the world, not just the country, in the world, partnered her with Ed Wallace, a NYPD first grade crime scene detective. And they were queried over this case. And they were asked, what percentage would you give from this violent crime scene that Bryan Kohberger cut himself and left his blood inside that crime scene? And their answers, both of them, not together, separately, was there's a 99% chance, 99.9% chance he left his blood in that crime scene. Have we heard anything about the crime scene, about the results of the crime scene, about the results of the toxicology, about the results of the autopsies? No, we haven't. Was any of that presented to the grand jury? I bet you the defense would want that. I bet you they would want to know that was that presented to the grand jury, because then that would be in the evidence. Was any of that evidence presented to the grand jury? So those are some of the things that we want to know, and we don't have that information right now. And again, with the discovery, they haven't gotten that yet. That information has not come back. We always hear that the victims, some of them, or one or two of them, fought back. So potentially, is there DNA evidence, the skin of Bryan Kohberger underneath the fingernails of one of the victims that struggled to fight for their lives, or any other DNA that he left on the scene? Hairs, fibers. We all know Locard's principle of exchange. I always remember Ed Wallace when I'm about to say theory of exchange. It's Dr. Edmund Locard's principle of exchange. And what that simply says is when someone goes into a crime scene, they take something from the outside or from their body and they leave it there. And conversely, they take something from the crime scene and they take that with them. And that's called evidence exchange, where, for example, that's why the warrant on Bryan Kohberger's car is so important, because the potential that he brought blood, hair, fibers, DNA of the victims into his car are extremely high. And think of how many bites of the apple that the police would get at that. His car, his apartment in Washington State, his parents' house in Pennsylvania, his computer, right? Potentially his office, if he had his own office at Washington State University where he was a teaching assistant, All of those things were fair game for warrants. All those things were fair game. All those things were fair game for the police to search warrants. Lula Morocco, Bill, what father flies across country and spends the night, wakes up and doesn't immediately say, "Where's the shower curtain, son?" Gets pulled over twice in Indy, cleans the car, bleach sister, doubts him. You know, Lou, I agree with all of that, but all of that is not evidence. The family is not going to testify against their brother, or in this case, the son. You know, Bryan Kohberger's father is not going to testify against him. So we know. Kim Alliston, hi, Juror 13. Good to see you. In my opinion, police off the cuff. Well, thank you. I don't want to read, but thank you so much, Kim, for all that praise. I was thinking you were going to say something about the case. Erin, listen, his parents are odd birds. Some people are just odd and weird. Sad because I love my husband, but his parents are odd birds. Look, we all have odd people in our families, right? And, you know, a lot of analysis also, besides the evidence, which is the most important thing, testimonial evidence. We haven't even spoke about testimonial evidence. And obviously, the defense and the prosecution are going to bring in witnesses to testify for the defense, for the prosecution. We don't know that yet, right? Who they have. The results of all these warrants, and we've got a picture of some of these warrants in regards to some of the things that they recovered, but not everything. And we're going to be just as surprised as the defense when we hear a lot about some of the evidence that has been recovered. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. If you like real crime stories from a police perspective, and I always say that because we have a different perspective than many other folks. If you like it from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. So go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe, give us a thumbs up, like us on YouTube. And if you want to support us financially, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels. We also have a YouTube channel memberships with, count them, 5 different levels. And you see the folks in the green font in the chat. They're part of our YouTube channel membership family. And we really, really appreciate them, and they support Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. You know, a lot of the things, of course, last week we had a lot of people. We got all kinds of experts on every single channel, and it seems like it's going 24/7. And one of the things that I sort of enjoy to watch, but I don't put 100% credence in it. I've watched my detectives for years interview people, and some of the greatest interviewers and interrogators in the NYPD were the ones that could really read body language well, because they knew when to go in hard and they knew when to pull back. They could read it in the person's face, in the person's voice. So they knew when to bear down and they knew when to ease up, because an interview interrogation could take 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, sometimes 24 hours. So detectives had to have that skill. So in this case, we had a lot of people out there, body language experts, that were reading the body language of Bryan Kohberger. I'm going to play a little bit of law and crime. We have one such expert, and I don't know if you can always take reading body language as an absolute. I think you could say certain things mean certain things and certain things don't mean other things, but I think it has to be taken in the context of the question, when it's asked, where it's asked, and the time that it's asked. So let me play a little bit of this.
Body language tell us? Well, no surprise, I'm no expert in body language. Everybody knows that. The good news is I have someone with me here today who is an expert. Joining me is Susan Constantine Perfido, the president of the Human Behavior Academy and the president of the Human Behavior Lab. Susan is an expert in reading body language and is a trial consultant. Susan, so good to have you here on Sidebar.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Folks, it's so interesting that she's a trial consultant, because do you think that the defense will be having a body language expert at the trial? You bet. I think I would bet a large amount of money on the fact that that's going to happen.
Of course. So we have a lot of video to go through. You're the perfect person to talk about it. I'm going to start in chronological order. So first up, I want to start with when Bryan Kohberger was stopped by police 1 month before the killings. So he gets pulled over for running a red light in Washington State. Let's take a look.
Hello, I am Officer Langus. Stops being audio and video recorded. I think you know why I stopped you. You ran the red light.
What actually happened was I was stuck in the middle of the intersection.
Yeah,
so
I was
forced
behind you
to
the whole
left.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So technically, you're not supposed to enter the intersection at all for that reason, because if the light turns red, then you're stuck in the intersection, and then you run the red light. So that's the reason I stopped you. Do you have your license on you?
Yep.
This, of course, is a very interesting stop because this stop, of course, happened a month before the murders. And when you see his body language in this, and I'll let the expert talk, but it's a lot different than his body language was post the murders.
Do you have the registration and insurance?
We just get this for you out.
You what?
I'm just gonna get this out for you.
Okay.
You know, folks, you also have to realize he's a PhD student in criminology. Do you think he knows anything about what to say and what not to say when you're pulled over by the police? I think he should. Most people should know what to do and what to say when they're pulled over by the police, because there's definitely do's and don'ts, and he seems like he's pretty good at it.
So would you explain that to me a little bit further? So in Pennsylvania, when you're stuck like in their intersection, you have to make the left. So what would the appropriate thing for me to have done? Just
You're
back up in
not
that
supposed to
situation?
block an intersection like that in Washington. So just by you blocking the intersection, that's technically a ticketable violation. And then then you're running a red light. So it's another ticketable offense. So you're not supposed to proceed into the intersection until you can go. Because a lot of people do what you just did, right? Is like you're sitting in the intersection waiting and then turns and then you're blocking. So
yeah, there was a little bit of confusion with.
This is probably the clearest video we have of him, and most up close. Again, what do you think? This is about 1 month before the killings.
Yeah, so there's nothing that's really overt that stands out to me here. You know, this is beforehand, so there's not cognitive load. He's not being watched or being pulled over because they think he's a suspect. So you don't see the typical glare stare that you see in later videos. He seems to be working with a police officer. The issue is that when I'm watching his eye movements and he's describing what had occurred, like he was, you know, in the middle of the intersection, and then he's also comparing it to his hometown. His eyes move side to side. You don't see him in visual recall or visual memory, which is upward. He tends to go side to side. And everything that I've seen with him, he tends to be very much of an internal processor. And then he begins to question the officer. He's not combative, but on the other hand, he's still trying to work his way out of it to have some sort of logic. So that tells me a lot about how he thinks and how he processes. He tends to be a very chronological analyzer and thinker.
Big thing that I take away from this, a few things. One, the fact that he's asking these questions and has this level of what I would say maybe comfort with the officer. This is a PhD student in criminology. Part of me feels like he's interested in learning the law. He's interested in learning, like, how is the police officer stopping him? This is my take. I'm not an expert. But what's the most alarming thing for me, this is a 1 month before allegedly killing 4 people. And there's been evidence that he's been at that residence or in that neighborhood for a time. It hasn't been entirely clear if he was following at least one of the victims or stalking or how pre-planned this was. But for somebody who a month later is going to murder 4 people, that's the allegation. How do you look at him? I mean, what should we be thinking about when we look at him there? I mean, that's the thing that gets me. I'm trying to see if there's anything there that would get any.
You know, folks, there, and I see what Jesse Weber is bringing up here, but in this instance, of course, and this is pre-November 13th, which we know what the quadruple murders happened on November 13th. He's very cool, calm, and collective, like any of us might be, although most people, when they get pulled over by the police, are quite nervous. I even get nervous, and I'm a former cop, and I get nervous, you get pulled over. It's like not an everyday occurrence. And for most people, yeah, and a lot of times you can't even tell where the lights and the sirens are coming from. You look around and it's not an everyday thing. But again, in this stop, he's very cool, he's very calm, he's very collective.
Indication he's about to commit a quadruple homicide.
Well, I have to share with you one thing that I did, and I'm going to kind of go off the grid a little bit here because he had written a letter or what his whole project was going to be about, right? We know that he's a PhD student, and he was trying to get people that would enter into this test or this analysis. Remember that? Well,
the Reddit survey, yeah.
Yeah, the Reddit survey, and also too that he was also writing. There was it wasn't a manifesto, but it was very similar to it. In that data was really a lot of wealth of information, because one of the things that we can learn about language is when they use contempt, anger, disgust types of language, it will tell us the percentage of the possibility of him carrying out a deadly act, like a terrorist act, a lone shooter act. So I happen to have run all that stuff through Decipher, which is a product that I have out of Sweden, which is used for counterterrorism. And I ran it through. He came up at 95% a surety that he was going to commit a violent act. So wow. With that being said, why didn't somebody, he was already kind of.
That's really interesting. She put his language into a database that can predict. Very, very interesting. I don't know where that database exists from, but she mentioned the name of it, and he came back as a 95% chance he was going to commit a violent act. That's pretty amazing.
On the radar, why didn't they run this through or analyze his language? So his language in itself told volumes. Now we're talking about demeanor, and that's what we're talking about today. But I want to let you know, language and words. And body movements and facial expressions, all that kind of tie together and tells you a lot about the person and the motive or intent.
I think this is fascinating. So let's move on to another traffic stop. Guy's like the worst driver of all time. He gets pulled over more than anybody we've ever seen. So now, this is from December 15th. This is after the killings. And we're going to play two videos. First, so he gets pulled over in Indiana while driving home to Pennsylvania. He's driving in the car with his father, and he's pulled over the first time for following a car too closely. Let's take a listen to some of that.
Hello. How you doing? How y'all doing today? Good, good. Take a look at your driver's license real quick if I could. See, he's right up on that van, man.
You could see his face here. You want to compare the difference between the stop 1 month prior to the murder and this now. His eyes are buggy. He's got that really nervous look on his face. It's night and day from the previous car stop.
He was right up on the back end of that van. Pulled you over for tailgating. Is this your car? Okay, cool. Where are you headed?
Well, we're coming from WSU, and we're expanding early.
What's WSU?
I go to the university, basically. The real estate incident, clearing up the shooting incident, that is SWAT team and everything.
So we're okay. I'm having a hard time hearing you because of the traffic. So you're coming from Washington State University, and you're going where? Oh,
we're going to be going to Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we're slightly punchy because we're driving for hours.
Hours, days.
You know, folks, one of the things about this car stop, and I've questioned it from day one, I have no doubt in my mind that the FBI or the Idaho State Police put up the Indiana State Police to pulling this car over. I do not believe this was a random car stop because they were under surveillance. They were being followed by the FBI. And I don't buy that they just let an anonymous or happenstance that the Idaho State Police just pulled them over by accident. You would think they would be following them. They would let the local jurisdictions know potentially. Oh, you know something. Sometimes the FBI does a lot of secret squirrel things, and they don't let people know things that would protect law enforcement from potential danger. So, but I think that these car stops were definitely choreographed.
Good driving. Well, almost good driving.
Okay. And what did you say about some SWAT team thing?
Yeah, there was. Yeah.
Jane C, thank you for the 199 super sticker. Do please get a bad vibe before they know. You know something? When you can read body language as a police officer, and we have Lieutenant Pete Pranzo in the chat, who was a street crime lieutenant, outstanding NYPD officer, and you could read people. And there's times when we would do car stops or felony car stops, and you could feel the hair on the back of your neck raise up. And I'm a firm believer that instincts are everything. And when your instincts tell you something's wrong, something is really badly wrong. And I believe that 100%. And I think Lieutenant Pete, who's in the chat, he would tell you the same thing, that you feel the hair on the back of your neck stand up, there's a problem. There's a real big problem.
There was a man shooting and everything.
Where? Interesting.
Well, it's horrifying because he's supposed to university. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So y'all work at the university there?
Actually, we work there.
Oh.
He was PhD.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I hadn't heard about that incident. Just yesterday, or?
No, this happened this morning. About an hour and a half ago. We're still wrapping it up. We're investigating. I'm not sure there's two shooters because they did shoot somebody.
Let's see.
And then you don't know about that actually. They were there shooting out of the window or something.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. So do me a favor, don't follow too close, okay? All right.
Okay. Now, later on, he gets pulled over again for doing the same thing. Let's take a look at that.
Folks, I'm really not buying that these were random car stops. So, you know, Jesse Weber is buying it. I don't buy it. I think these were choreographed car stops, cooperation between law enforcement. That's my opinion. Could I be wrong? I can always be wrong, but this is my hunch.
State police got your license and registration. I stopped you when you were driving by me there. You're looking close to back that semi. About one car between you and the back of this trailer. About one car going 10 miles an hour. So we're going 60 or 70 miles an hour. We're about 6 or 7 cars. So you guys did? Yeah. So. You got stopped by a trooper? We don't have any SUVs. It was a county guy. Was it like a black SUV? Okay. All right.
Okay. Now, it's really hard to hear him in that one, and you don't really see him in that second video. But Susan, here's my take on this, right? If he did this, he's the killer. He could be thinking, wow, I'm about to get arrested. I'm about to get arrested for murder. It's my take about his initial impression of that. But, you know, what do you think?
Well, when I'm looking at his body language throughout, I want you to pay attention to the lack of eye blinking and that very blank empty stare or the glare. He has this glare about him. And when he is in that place, it's called fight or flight, right? So he's really hyper aware, because when you think about if he had committed these crimes, these horrible crimes, he's on high alert. He's in that fight or flight response. So that's where his eyes are very frozen. His eye pupil dilation is larger. And this kind of gives you indication, why is he feeling this sense of fear? The other thing is he has a very cold kind of iciness about him. He's looking over at his father for affirmation. He does these very quick little jarts. It's not like he's turned towards the officer listening and then nodding his head. And it would be a way of non-verbally saying, I understand you, I hear what you're saying, and they're following him. He's not doing that. He's looking straight ahead. He's darting off. He's coming back. He's darting off with that very blanket stare. The other thing that I thought was really interesting is how he corrected his dad when he was talking about that there was a shooting. There wasn't a shooting. He says, oh, that we don't know that yet. So it's interesting that he came in and he actually said that. And again, when you think about it, he questions people. So when we go back to the first video, what did he do? He questioned the logic, or questioned what the officer was saying. But really what he's really trying to do is to gather intel for himself, to knowing how to then move forward with this next question.
Do you get a sense of relief when the officers leave?
Well, he knows, number one, that he's being questioned, right? So I don't know if I would say a sense of relief, like where his shoulders are slumped down and he breathes out. That's kind of like, okay, we got through that one. He didn't. He's trying to keep very collected. So when he's ready to go, he's ready to go. So I guess that would be the indicator that he was ready, that he was, the fear had dropped. Now he's ready to go again, but he's on high alert. So that's what I'm seeing here more than anything else, because when I'm looking at his facial expressions, he has this very intense expression. You can see it in his forehead. You see that.
You know, guys, 100%. I mean, you look at his face and he is really raised up. That's an old street crime expression. He's raised up. He's suspicious. That we would see that Lieutenant Pete Pranzo and some of my compadres, if this was in New York City, we'd be pulling him out of the car and tossing the car for a gun, because he's acting extremely suspiciously.
This we call a bulge that comes across the forehead. It's when he is leaning, his head goes down, or his forehead goes down, and then he raises his eyebrows. That's what we call a fear response, but he's borderline paranoid. So when I'm analyzing someone, I'm analyzing these fear responses and the psychopathy of it. So things that we know is that they have a very stared, glared expression. They have a very blank glare about them. This is what we call fixation. Okay. When a person is very fixated, you see these frozen responses. You also see eyes dilate. You will see these frozen, very rapid movements. You'll see fight or flight responses. All of that also is tied into paranoia. And if you think about the guy who shot up all those people in a theater, the guy with the red hair, he thought he was the Joker. If you look at his expression, look at the two compared to one another. You see the eyes wide open and no affect in the face, bottom region. So when you look at the top region compared to the bottom region, nothing here changes, but you see the fixation.
That's so interesting. Now that you're saying that, I'm actually thinking about. I haven't thought about that.
You know, folks, it's what we call the old deer in headlights look. You know, that fear, paranoia, as she says, flight or fight mechanism. All of those things in that expression are absolutely known to law enforcement. I can see when I would see that look on someone's face, I knew to dig much further than just license, registration, insurance card. When they had that face on, it was put your hands on the steering wheel and don't move. You know, let me see your hands. That's what we would be saying in the case like this situation.
That guy in a long time, but now I'm remembering his mugshot, and that's eerily similar. Okay, so Susan, I want to get into Kohberger in court. So he's arrested 6 weeks after the killings. In January is his first court appearance. We see him in the orange jumpsuit. It's the first time all of us really see a video of him. There were pictures of him when he's arrested.
You know, in court, his demeanor is so much, he just seems cool, like he did in the car stop earlier in October, a month before the murders. His demeanor is 100% different than, of course, on the car stop post murder.
Arrested. There might have been video of him being walked into or wearing the jumpsuit vest. But this is really the first time we see him in court. Let's watch some of this at his first court appearance.
Oh, we got it.
Mr. Kohberger, I am going to advise you of the rights that you have in this case. I am going to go over the criminal complaint with you, and then we're going to discuss setting the matter for further hearing. You have the following rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to the presumption of innocence. That means the state bears the burden to prove that you are guilty of this offense beyond a reasonable doubt. You have the right to a preliminary hearing.
All right, folks, we're going to speed up.
His lips away from his teeth to kind of lubricate the membranes inside of his mouth. So these are all fear, flight, or flight responses. But he does nod that he does understand. So I do believe he understands the capacity of what he's being charged with. And he does add affirmatives, nod yeses. But I'd like to be able to get into when they're actually pulling down the indictment about what he is charged with and his body language.
Okay, well, keep that in mind, because I do want to ask you that, and also the $1 million question, which is, we're going to play a little bit more of him in court. If there's any indication based on his demeanor in court, if this is somebody who is innocent and they are shocked by the idea of these wrongful charges against them, or this is somebody who committed the crime and knows that the jig is up and is in a lot of trouble. Don't answer it yet. We're going to play a little bit more of him. This is Bryan Kohberger's latest court appearance. First, this is his arraignment on the felony charges, where the charges are actually read out to him.
You know, folks, a great point that Jesse Weber just made there. The fact that he knows the charges against him, and he's sitting there. The charges are being read, yet he's cool as a cucumber. Does that, I'll use a Gearyism. Is that consciousness of guilt? Is he accepting the fact that he potentially is guilty for this? Or are we supposed to believe that this is just, yes, he's innocent until proven guilty? It was going to be he's just innocent and he's not worried about it. Jeff B., thank you so much for the $5 super sticker. Thank you, Bill, for all your hard work. Well, thank you so much for supporting me and for supporting the show. Denise Clark, thank you for the $4.99 super sticker. Hey, Bill, I appreciate your wisdom as a sergeant. My stepdad is a retired homicide detective from Cleveland, Ohio. Great place, the great state of Ohio. Thank you so much for all your support, you guys. I just, there's so many different things on about this case. There's so much what I would call, that there's a lot of people, talking heads. There's a lot of content creators. There's a lot of broadcasting networks that are, putting everything and anything on this out there on this case. We had learned this week that, and some people tell me, oh, it was out there way before this, that they have a proof that he bought a K-bar knife on Amazon in Pennsylvania prior to the murder. To me, that is extremely, extremely powerful evidence. And if I missed that, I don't know how I missed it, because I don't think I did miss it. But now you have the sheath that goes to this knife, and the sheath that goes to this Marine Corps K-bar knife has DNA on it, his DNA on it. It was father's DNA on it that they matched up. So again, powerful information, powerful evidence. Are we to say that, oh, that's not very powerful? I want to show a little bit of Steve Gonsalves, his emotion in regards to seeing Kohberger in court at the arraignment. And again, Steve Gonsalves, the father of Kaylee Gonsalves, he's every dad across the USA right now, a man who's had to deal with the violent death of his beloved daughter. And he's been in the public eye the whole time. And I just, I can't praise him enough. And I think early on in the case, maybe he behaved not badly, but in a way that maybe wasn't great for the case. But now, this is the all-American dad who's going through a horrific time right now.
On the defendant. Let's watch.
Rage is definitely probably the primary emotion that you have. And then I remind myself that I need to, actually understand what's going on and memorize everything that's being said, take notes. So you want to be strategic as well, because, justice doesn't fall out of the sky. You sometimes you got to earn it. You got to do everything. We're just parents and we've been thrown in this. And, we just listen and we work together and we send out our emails and, did you hear this update? Did you hear that update? So we're getting more organized. And I think we'll have a full front, showing up in that courtroom. We moved here and people move here for the safety that we have. And we have to make sure that the world knows that you can't come to Idaho. You can't hunt our children down and you can't kill them in their beds and just be given, a room to stay. And then, this guy's a smart man. He's going to try to exercise his influence and write papers for other criminals. And he'd have a presence and he'd still be able to act as a bad character. And that's not what we want. We're looking for somebody to, pay the price of what he did. It's not one person, it's four individuals. We're doing everything that they could possibly do to better their lives. And they just went to bed one night and some monster snuck into their home and killed them.
Unbelievable, folks, huh? How does that make you feel? Any of you folks out there that are parents, that this man and his wife and 3 other sets of parents are dealing with this horrific tragedy. Someone in the chat just asked the question, is this a death penalty case? And absolutely, they do have the death penalty in Idaho. Now, if they go for the death penalty, I didn't know this, and I just learned this the other day, that all 12 jurors, before they could serve on a death penalty case, have to be pro-death penalty. So they're not going to put someone on the jury that is anti-death penalty, if they do, in fact, go for the death penalty, because then the case would not, there's no chance they'd get the death penalty if someone was anti-death penalty on the jury. However, what that does for the prosecution, it gives them a leg up in having a pro law enforcement jury. So yes, this is a death penalty case. And folks, I think the important thing to remember, and I mention this every time I come on, is that the real victims of this case are Ethan Chapin, Zana Knodel, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonsalves. And we always want to mention their names and not refer to them as the Idaho 4 or the Idaho quadruple case, which sometimes I do in the title, or else YouTube doesn't like the title. If the title, so I don't want to get into it, but sometimes I'll call it the Idaho quadruple in the title. But we always want to remember them, and we want to keep them at the forefront of this case. And I always try to keep them in our hearts and in our minds. Folks, if you're looking for if you're in the New York City metropolitan area and you're looking for a great defense attorney, then Joe Murray is your man. Joe Murray is a retired NYPD police officer and a fantastic defense attorney. And I add that he's a huge supporter of the Police Off the Cuff podcast. You can reach Joe on his cell at 718-514-3855. Email him at joe@jmurray-law.com, and his website is jmurray-law.com. Give him a call if you need help with a defense attorney or any legal problems. Joe is your man. Folks, I also want to just say that, again, if you're not subscribed to us going on YouTube, make sure you put a thumbs up and a like button. I'm hearing we have a lot of 384 in the chat, but not a lot of likes. Hit that like button, because that helps YouTube share this out there. It helps people realize that we are really a good podcast and they should follow us. You know, folks, this case is going to go on for a long time because it is a death penalty case. And it could go on. Look, say this case doesn't go till 2024. This is probably a 6-week to two, anywhere from 2 months to 2 to 3, I'd say 2 to 3 month trial. And after the case goes to the jury, if he's found guilty and the death penalty is given, it could take a long, long time. I think that's one of the reasons that sometimes the prosecution will ask the parents, you know, how do you feel about the death penalty? Do you want us to push for the death penalty? Because going for the death penalty is going to take a lot longer. And even if he gets it, could be 20 or 30 years worth of appeals, and he may not get the penalty, providing he's found guilty. He may not receive the penalty for 20 or 30 years. So do we want to go through that? Do you want to put your family through that? Or do you just want there to be a guilty plea and a sentence of life without parole? So that's what will be presented, of course, to the parents in regards to this case. And yes, again, someone asked in the chat, yes, it is a death penalty case. Whether or not they vote for it and they get it, you know, it depends. You always remember the face of Steve Gonsalves and his wife, and that empty looking face again of Bryan Kohberger, who is, again, I always have to say it, innocent till proven guilty. It seems that a lot of us that report on this, of course, are reporting from the prosecution side more than the defense side. And naturally, I give the addendum when I first come up that if you're interested in a true crime from a police perspective, this is your place. And look, we are pro-prosecution, police off the cuff, real crime stories, because that's where we're coming from. We're coming from that, you know, pro-prosecution, pro-police. And again, I will say numerous times that Bryan Kohberger is innocent till proven guilty. But there seems to be a heck of a lot of evidence. And this case is going to move very criminal justice system. And as you can see, I have the kids on the screen: Ethan Chapin, Zaina Knodel, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Madison Mogan. I listed their names left to right. And I always like to mention Ethan Chapin was 20 years old at the time of this. He was a triplet, or he is a triplet. And that's in this picture on the screen is his brother and his sister. And again, we just like to put the human face, I'm showing the pictures here, the human face to this case, because sometimes it just gets, it's sort of like people have these view of like killers, and there's a great interest in it, but I don't ever want to forget these young people that were involved in it, that are the victims of it, and their families, as a matter of fact. You know, folks, I meant to cover so many things today, and I got through some, but I didn't get through everything. And I just want to thank everyone for showing up today. I realize it's Memorial Day weekend. And again, keep all of our veterans, our veterans that made the extreme sacrifice, and even our people serving in the armed forces right now. If you see somebody on this Memorial Day weekend in uniform, or you know that they're in the service, thank them for their service. I think they really appreciate that. You know, in a small way sometimes in our police service, people, especially after 9/11, people would come up to us and thank us for what we did. But that was rare. It was rare. Not after 9/11, it wasn't, but rare to ever have that happen post or 9/11. But we felt that love after 9/11, and I think that we should all on this Memorial Day weekend show the love to our service members and enjoy the time with your friends and your family and your loved ones. And I want everyone, of course, to have a great weekend, a safe weekend. And thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. Have a great weekend and God bless.